In 80 years, fame in the 20th century had paralleled the history of radioactivity, which had started off as a glow in the night in Madame Curie's backyard laboratory, gone through an unfortunate phase when it destroyed the lives of every human being it could reach, and ended up so well understood that if you followed the handbook, you could run a power station with it. The force of fame, in all its poisonous radiance, had been tamed into something almost friendly. Or so it appeared. At first, nothing could appear more friendly than Ronald Reagan, unless it started shaking hands with the surrounding scenery. Reagan was America's way back to the future. The world's leading power had felt its power slipping. Reagan's mere appearance promised to put things back the way they used to be when Jimmy Stewart and Gary Cooper went to Washington, when Henry Fonda was president. And Reagan wouldn't be thrown by all the media attention. Reagan was used to fame. Presenting an image had been his life. Reagan, or the men behind him, offered simplicity. Reagan looked, talked, walked and rode like an old-time movie hero who whipped the heavies in the last reel and got the girl. Now that political campaigning had moved almost entirely to television, it depended on a few phrases read out parrot fashion. Reagan was good at that because he had been doing it since the days when it was called dialogue.
We're on a Death Valley day set and water's not handy. Baraxo waterless hand cleaner really cleans up for us. Just a dab. The whole crew swears by Baraxo waterless. And so will you.
A while back along the campaign trail, I was doing a question and answer session when a little girl, couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, stood up, asked a question I'd heard before, but coming from her, it threw me. She said, "Why do you want to be president?"
Decades having gone by, Reagan's delivery, like the color of his hair, was miraculously unaltered. If anything, he had increased his capacity to sound perfectly sincere while saying something in a relaxed manner that he had memorized only with difficulty.
I was frustrated. On the way to the next town, I turned to Nancy and I said, I wish I could answer her question again.
Some said that there was nothing else in Reagan's head except scraps of dialogue from commercials and old movies.
I'm gonna do it just one more time. You ain't seen nothing yet.
They might have been right, but they were missing the point. Reagan's presidency might be mainly a performance. It might not add up to anything more than making people feel good. But if his opponents poured all their efforts into mocking him, they were calling the majority of the population suckers.
America is the most peaceful, least warlike nation in modern history.
Even if Reagan was all fame and nothing else, for now, that was enough. There was no man in America to match him. The only man to match him was in Britain, and she was a woman.
The Russians said that I was an iron lady. They were right. Rhetoric and heckling doesn't do it. Tory action does and will. That is fact, and they cannot argue against it.
Margaret Thatcher carried on with all the confidence of Winston Churchill minus the cigar, drumming up memories of a Britain with a seat at the top table. Promising her country that it could rebuild itself, she offered an example by rebuilding herself.
First,
at the start, she had an unstudied look.
We're not living up to the best in our character. So be it.
After the image experts had done their work, she looked and sounded as studied as the Bible.
That we have in fact done things which no other government dared to tackle, and I believe that we can go on tackling those things.
Focusing all the attention on herself, she forced the opposition into the fatal mistake of making personal attacks on her. It was a mistake because it was too easy. By upstage males in her own party, she was called Attila the Hen and a lot of other things less kind. For the satirists, she would have been a sitting duck if she hadn't moved so fast. But no parody by others could match her supremely confident self-parody of vim, decisiveness, and bustle. Rumours that Queen Elizabeth II looked forward to her weekly meeting with Mrs. Thatcher like a visit to the dentist gained weight during the Falklands War when Mrs. Thatcher started sounding like Queen Elizabeth I.
Just rejoice at that news and congratulate our forces and the Marines.
Mrs. Thatcher was born for fame, and the only question was whether her own country was a big enough stage to contain her. The question was answered when she formed a rapport with Ronald Reagan that was the biggest transatlantic romance since Clark Gable embraced Vivian Leigh.
We share so many of the same goals and a determination to achieve them, which you summed up so well, and alas, I cannot imitate this wonderful American English accent. You ain't seen nothing yet.
When Mrs. Thatcher visited Reagan in America, he paid her the compliment of saying that she was in the same business as he was, show business.
Based on the career that I once had before this one, you are a very tough act to follow.
Maggie and Ronnie were two stars together, bathing in each other's glow. America's rebuilt self-confidence was embodied in the rebuilt body of Sylvester Stallone. Stallone acted the part of Reagan's favorite dream, restored pride in America. Stallone started playing the part before Reagan came to power, when he created the role of Rocky, the boxing has-been who refused to lie down, the bum who came back. With Reagan safely installed in the White House, Rocky came back again in Rocky II and Rocky III, not to mention Rocky IV, proving over and over that in Reagan's rediscovered America, a man didn't need welfare or any of that sissy stuff, that if he could only just keep wearing down his opponent's fist by hitting it with his face, he could make it on his own. But Stallone wasn't just a boxer with restored pride. He established a whole new persona as a Vietnam veteran with restored pride. Rambo was a comic book hero, but the comic was read by adults. The kind of adults who got excited by a heavy caliber, belt-fed phallic symbol. Rambo's audience covered the planet. He was the new Bruce Lee, living out the fantasies of the helpless with all the power of American technology sticking out of his trousers. Rambo kept on coming back in Rambo 2, Rambo 3, not to mention Rambo 4, proving over and over that one man on his own could still stand up to the bad guys as long as he had the right gun, grenades, attack helicopter, and personalized rocket launcher. The way Stallone told it, Vietnam and any other mild overseas embarrassments were really victories because they gave America the chance to rediscover its true character as a country where an individual could come back from defeat and achieve anything.
Daddy, hang on a second, will you? Hey, Marshal, you ready to go?
J.R. Ewing's reign as the King of Dallas reached its apotheosis under Reagan.
Yeah, now we're talking about 100,000 barrels, is that right? All right, good. Good. Tell him I'll be in touch.
Now that corrupt America was passé and straight arrow America was back in business, it was time for J.R. to get his. The shooting of J.R. was announced in advance all over the world. It was fictional, but it made news like fact. For the episode in which J.R.'s killer was finally unmasked, Even Britain's staid BBC ran a teaser during the evening news.
The shooting of J.R., the villain of the American TV soap opera Dallas. The secret of who done it is contained in videotape brought into Heathrow Airport by an American security guard. It'll be kept at a secret location overnight and won't be given to the BBC until tomorrow morning, when American viewers will already have seen it.
The line between fact and fiction had become blurred, and it was fame that did the blurring. J.R. came back. He was no longer a character, he was a messiah. He rose from the dead and continued with the next series, like a president going into his next term. Larry Hagman, the very intelligent actor who played J.R., had lost his own identity but made sure he was well compensated financially. He looked forward to a lucrative afterlife.
Well, Daddy, it's taken a long time and a lot of hard work. But finally, it's all mine.
Dear Mr. Levin, from information I received while using a Ouija board, I believe that there will be an attempt to assassinate you. The spirit that gave me this information was Brian Epstein.
John Lennon had come to New York to lead an ordinary life with the self-exiled Japanese conceptual artist Yoko Ono. Lennon thought he had found a way out of the madness of Beatles fame. But he had walked right back into it, and it was holding a gun. The assassin was a fan who had asked Lennon to autograph his Double Fantasy album only a few hours before. The assassin thought he was John Lennon, the real John Lennon, the one who had not sold out. The Lennon killing threw a lasting scare into every famous entertainer in America. Sudden death from a criminal had been understood since Lindbergh. Sudden death from a fan meant that fame was a cage you could never get out of. The best you could do was turn it into an electrified fence. The growing suspicion that American fandom could be fatal became a certainty when Ronald Reagan himself got shot. This time, the perpetrator wasn't a fan of the victim. He was a fan of the film star Jodie Foster, and he did it to impress her. He doubled her fame by doing so, but she would willingly have had it halved again. She was her fans' victim as surely as Reagan was.
I've never met, spoken to, or in any way associated with one John W. Hinckley.
Her recovery was long and slow and involved a strict ban on discussing the subject in interviews. Reagan's recovery was more rapid, as if he had played this scene before. He knew what he had to do. He had to get well again so that he could walk off with the girl in the last reel.
Sit down.
When the three kings of Orient visited the infant Christ in the manger, it rated a few paragraphs in the Bible. For the piercingly sweet but virtually monosyllabic Lady Diana Spencer, the media coverage was total and immediate, converting her from country house obscurity to global omnipresence in 24 hours.
Work now, okay?
She was all set to share the fame of the Prince of Wales. The match was a real event between a real heir to a real throne and a real young woman. But the wedding was a media event. Satellites sent the whole thing by TV all over the world. The mega-budget production was so immensely successful that no one thought of asking whether an institution like royalty could live by the rules of the show business spectacular, especially since this one had no understudies.
I, Charles Philip Arthur George.
I, Charles Philip Arthur George.
The Prince of Wales had fortunately been trained for the part, although judging from what happened to the previous Prince of Wales, there was no guarantee that the training manual was a helpful guide. But the Princess of Wales had to do the whole thing without a single rehearsal. All the world's agony aunts combined to assure her that if she stayed natural, she would be okay. She was the biggest female silent film star in the world, and she didn't even have to act.
Good evening, everyone. Leonard, how good of you to make an appearance.
I'm only sorry to be delayed.
Oh, Brock says you're all ragged with fatigue. I hear you've been having the most frightful week.
It has been, yes.
Well, don't worry. Here, at least you can relax. You've met
Female sound film stars had to act harder when Meryl Streep put up the standard. She could play any character of any nationality, changing her accent to suit.
Suddenly remembered that my father is waiting for that speech, and I hurry home to finish the typing, but...
It was a new kind of stardom. The old stars had been themselves. The new ones were anyone else, appearing in a series of perpetual transformations while they kept their real personalities safely at home.
And my father has no time to check that before speaking. And he get up in front of all those people.
Some of the new stars didn't seem to have a real personality at all, just the transformations. Older people throughout the world started hearing about Michael Jackson. Young people had been aware of him for most of their tiny lives, but their parents had never known his name, except perhaps as the youngest member of the Jackson 5, a Tamla Motown singing group of a previous era. Even in those days, Michael stood out among his older siblings. When the famous Tamla solo singer Diana Ross appeared on the same show, she paid him a generous tribute. The Jackson 4 having vanished into history, the Jackson 1 transformed himself into something tall, thin, miraculously flexible, and altogether unprecedented. To keep his vast public plugged into the circuit, Michael Jackson, the person, went on transforming himself. He wore various costumes. He had plastic surgery to make his features look more Caucasian. He made it look as if all the famous black people from Jack Johnson to Bill Cosby had boxed, composed, sung, danced, written, run, jumped, marched, fought, and died in vain. Michael Jackson was creating his own reality, and it was a fantasy. His home in Hollywood was an infantile theme park, a magic kingdom, a fame fortress. The soap opera Dynasty was another magic kingdom, a Disneyland game reserve whose leading characters were human holograms. British actress Joan Collins played the bitchy Alexis, a woman so strong she could carry the weight of a pair of shoulder pads, which had previously belonged to the nose tackle of the Denver Broncos.
You know, I'm really not sure about these pearls. They're so dowdy. They might look good on you. But then again, where would you wear them after Blake goes broke?
The American TV executives thought that her ritzy British accent spelled class. In real life, Joan Collins had been a glamour queen in British movies, suffering from the usual problem that there were no glamorous British movies. Later on, she starred in a couple of semi-porn, fully low-budget feature films before hitting it big as Alexis. Popular newspapers splashed stories about her as if she was Alexis, often omitting her real name. She obliged by conducting her emotional life as if it was a soap opera too. And she played the soap opera as if it was grand opera, with big emotions.
Business rivals of Alexis Colby Dexter are not hiding their delight over her failure to win this round.
At the end of every season of Dynasty, there was a mass write-out so that the actors couldn't be sure they would be back next time if they asked for more money. They put Joan Collins at the bottom of the pile, but you always knew that next time she would be back on top. Dynasty was her showcase. She had to be in it. So, strangely enough, did real-life bigwigs who had previously run the country or bombed other countries. Enter Henry Kissinger.
Hello.
Hello, Alexis. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. I haven't seen you since Portofino.
Should ex-President Ford have been doing this? But there were no awkward questions in the Magic Kingdom.
Isn't this a magnificent ball?
We love it. That's why we come back every year.
Fame in America was breeding monsters, but they were bred by genetic laws which the monsters themselves understood better all the time. Until finally, the first fully self-constructed superstar came crunching into frame. Arnold Schwarzenegger. He wasn't the first Austrian to be born with an urge to conquer the world. The difference was that Arnie knew how. His first move was to win the Mr. Universe title. Like every previous Mr. Universe, he looked like an apartment block in a posing pouch. But the Reaganite, Rambo-esque ideal of perpetual self-reconstruction was wide open to parody. Arnie made a point of it. After an early near hit as Conan the Barbarian, for his big breakthrough film role, he played himself. That is, an android, somebody someone had built. And somebody had built him. He had. His brightest move of all was to let the media in on his secret. The tongue in his cheek was hard to see amongst all his other bulges, but the press loved the way he didn't hide the hustle. He made his career the story.
George Bush! George Bush! He is!
When he went out to perform charitable works, such as promoting the Republican Party, he cultivated his gift for making jokes about himself before anyone else did.
He calls me Conan the Republican.
When Maria Shriver of the Kennedy family married him, it set the seal on the deal. New fame had risen to the same status as old fame.
Arnold cannot be here all the time, so I have a replica of this star.
By sheer good management, in less than 10 years, a bad joke had turned himself into an American national symbol, beaming his smile to the world like a male Statue of Liberty.
How about a nice big hand for Arnold Schwarzenegger, ladies and gentlemen?
Yes, press. This is not an arch. It's a lengthening and straightening of the spine.
Jane Fonda showed the way to female bodily perfection with a video aerobics course that gave her fame as a healer to add to her fame as a political figure, which had grown out of her fame as an actress.
Feel the stretch up the left side of the body.
Martina Navratilova spent her first few years at the top, looking not much more formidable than any other Czechoslovakian female tennis champion.
30, 40.
Later on, she took a leaf out of Arnold Schwarzenegger's muscle-bound book by turning herself into an all-American power person. Transformation extended her career.
That's it. That's it. That's it. And the dream has come true.
Transformation was the whole career. Madonna was a world expert on 20th century fame. She knew how to get more of it than any one person had ever had. The secret was to become more than one person. She became Madonna the Self-Manipulator, a reprogrammable multi-purpose microcomputer in a humanoid body shell, tough enough to crack nuts without using its hands. But transforming herself into a new self was only one more beginning in a career that saw every end as a new start. She was a one-woman hall of fame, a walking museum, her only originality to borrow the originality of others. But critics who said she didn't belong with Garbo or Dietrich or Monroe were just showing their age. They were remembering the past. Madonna was taking it over on behalf of those who didn't remember it. With her, fame was the only reality. No revelation about her private life could embarrass her because she made all the revelations herself. She had no private life. It was all public.
I don't think you know what.
Realizing that someone famous was essentially a mystery everyone knew about, she combined rarity value with total market saturation by never doing anything that wasn't outrageous.
I'll come to you when you say.
She earned extra publicity for being censored. She knew that scandal couldn't hurt her. She was scandal. That was her story. Scandal in the 80s became an industry. It raked up muck about people in the past as well as in the present. All the facts came out about the late President Kennedy's fondness for attractive women. The stories might have given yet more pain to the survivors among his tragedy-stricken family, but few thought him any the less clever or charming. All the facts came out about the late Grace Kelly's fondness for attractive men. The stories might have given yet more pain to the tragedy-stricken royal family of Monaco, but few thought her any the less regal or elegant. A book about Frank Sinatra dwelt on his supposed mafia connections. It carried several photographs of Sinatra in Italian restaurants with thick-set men who took their holidays in Sicily. But people weren't going to throw away their copy of Songs for Swinging Lovers just because of that. Scandal had become part of fame's price, but it wasn't scandal anymore. It was just coverage. If fame was already there, bad publicity could only feed it.
My name is Oliver North, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Marine Corps. My best friend is my wife, Betsy. I came here to tell you the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Thanks to a cartoon character called Colonel Oliver North, scandal hit Ronald Reagan too, but it didn't hurt him either. Though North obligingly took the fall, many said that Reagan was the true culprit because he must have known.
Ronald Reagan, R-E-A-G-A-N.
But they were the same people who had already made Reagan famous for not knowing anything.
I don't recall.
They couldn't have it both ways. So all Reagan had to do was look as vague as usual, and he was invulnerable.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Rock Hudson, a truck driver turned film star, had been famous in the 60s as a strong, solid man of integrity who frequently made love to Doris Day. It became blatantly clear that he had never been making love to Doris Day at all when he died of AIDS 20 years later. He was famous all over again as a strong, solid man of integrity who had bravely faced his fate. Liberace looked all set for eternal life as the first person to be successfully embalmed while still able to play the piano. When he, too, died from AIDS, all those mothers loved him no less. Indeed, his stature increased. The crusade against AIDS needed celebrity heroes. Live Aid concert had begun the fashion for calling in famous names to deal with world catastrophes. With thousands of people dying of hunger in Ethiopia, the Irish pop singer Bob Geldof staged a worldwide satellite-linked all-star concert to raise money. His message was admirably devoid of the usual show business schmaltz.
Give us the money. There are people dying now, so give me the money.
The same personalities cropped up at one good cause celebrity concert after another all over the planet. Fame had developed into an ecology of its own, sustainable without cost. Showbiz stars were encouraged in the belief that they had a power beyond governments. Merely by doing their usual showbiz thing on a bigger stage than ever, celebrities in the West became political figures. Political figures in the East became celebrities in the West. It started in Poland with Lech Wałęsa, the trade union leader who began by challenging the power of the ruling Communist Party and ended up by toppling it. This was something different from fame as it had come to be understood in the West. The people's commitment to Wałęsa cost them something. They were risking all they had, up to and including their lives. But as Poland grew closer to the free world, Wałęsa couldn't prevent his Eastern fame from turning into the Western kind. The sudden miraculous appearance by his side of Mrs. Thatcher confirmed his position among the world's great leaders.
I knew that I had to come and feel the spirit of Poland for myself.
The Russians didn't come to crush the Polish rebellion because they were too busy with a rebellion of their own. Theirs was led by the man in power, Mikhail Gorbachev. For a Soviet leader, he looked unusually like a human being.
Perestroika, perestroika.
The wary pointed out that Stalin had looked quite benevolent too. They were right to be wary, but wrong about Gorbachev. The Soviet Union's previously unimaginable disintegration began. Gorbachev had done it by the uniqueness of his personality. Again, it was something different from fame in the West, and again, as the new Soviet Union drew closer to the West, Gorbachev couldn't stop his Eastern fame from turning into the Western kind. He had a Western-style glamour-puss wife, Raisa. Wives of previous Soviet leaders, it looked as if they went shopping carrying live chickens for barter. Raisa carried a credit card. She was enough of a Jackie O for the Western press to hail Gorby as a Kennedy-style swinging statesman. The sudden miraculous appearance by his side of Mrs. Thatcher confirmed his position among the world's great leaders. Gorbachev had a fierce competitor for Mrs. Thatcher's affections in Ronald Reagan, but there was only one phrase for the way the two famous men got on. They got on famously.
We find ourselves standing like this.
Incredulous observers said that although their double act looked like Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, the real comparison was with Francis and his talking mule. The sophisticated world laughed when the suave Gorbachev and the bumbling Reagan met in Reykjavik. But it was there that Gorbachev, on behalf of the country that had led the world into revolution, finally gave up the struggle. He hadn't surrendered to Reagan, he had surrendered to reality. He was a rational man. Colonel Gaddafi wasn't rational at all by Western standards, but he didn't care about Western standards. Now that the whole world was a single 24-hour instantaneous news network, the Middle East could get its famous characters on screen just as fast as the West. Gaddafi left the old Soviet bogeyman looking colorless. He had the clothes, he had the charisma, he had style. The Ayatollah Khomeini had austerity. The rise of Islamic fundamentalism offered powerful evidence that there could still be such a thing as a truly charismatic leader who wasn't just there for the world's entertainment and who couldn't be tamed by a visit from Mrs. Thatcher. The Ayatollah was worshipped as a god by millions of people while he was still alive. For the crime of having published blasphemous thoughts about the Prophet, Khomeini pronounced a sentence of death on a British subject, Salman Rushdie. Suddenly the most famous writer since Hemingway, Rushdie had to go into hiding in Britain, which among its population had thousands of Islamic fundamentalists whose loyalty to the Queen was far outstripped by their worship of the Ayatollah. When the Ayatollah died, worship turned to frenzy. This was no Rudolph Valentino-style funeral where the famous turned up to mourn their own mortality. This was fame taken back to its origins in religious ecstasy. The West looked on in disbelief at the shocking spectacle of belief. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a leader who used all the personality cult trappings of the old-style Marxist regimes, but seemed to need little of the coercive apparatus, because the people were crazy about him, no matter how crazy he might be himself. When he invaded Kuwait, the West sent General Stormen Norman Schwarzkopf to stop him. The Gulf War was a media event, and Stormen Norman was dream casting for the lead, having apparently modeled his flamboyant persona on John Wayne, Rambo, Terminator 2, Lethal Weapon 3, Superman 4, and Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. The marketable glamour of the West, that we knew about. We knew it had a bogus element built in. Our clumsy heroes were in on the gag. Wiseacres found it easier to make jokes about Stormen Norman than to condemn Saddam. Real evil was too authentic, too vivid a reminder that even if the Cold War had been called off, the world might still go on producing the occasional self-declared political genius who really believed his own publicity. For 70 years, Lennon's fame had been the wedge that kept the world divided. He had been the symbol of the revolution. Now the revolution was over, and the symbol was finally out of a job. He had made his big mistake back at the start when he failed to realize that if a social revolutionary wants to be successful over the long term, then he needs a good accountant. When the Czechs took down the statue of Stalin from the hill above Prague, they replaced it with a billboard of Mick Jagger's tongue. As the end of the 20th century approached, fame had come full circle. Video made famous people immortal before death. Now they would always be there. You didn't even have to switch them on. Unless you were rich enough to guard your privacy, you couldn't switch them off. Throughout the century, famous names endorsed products. It was a conscious act of trade. They leased their faces and took the money. It was between them and their conscience. By the end of the century, famous people who had been dead for years were cropping up in advertisements all over again. This time, they hadn't even been consulted. Fame had a life of its own. At the end of the century, nobody famous could stop her whole life being famous. When Martina Navratilova's latest lifetime companion sued her for severance pay, the great champion discovered that the same computer which had told her what she could eat couldn't control the bad publicity. It was her worst nightmare, a match she couldn't win by skill and will. It was a match against her own fame. At the end of the century, fame was better understood, but it was no kinder when it went wrong. When his son got into trouble with the law, Marlon Brando had to leave his private island and plead with the press not to hurt his children. But his fame had already hurt them. Nobody had managed his fame better than Woody Allen until the day his private life got in the news. Then his fame became just as unmanageable as anyone else's. He had thought it was his business, but it was ours. At the end of the century, there was no way back to privacy. For the amateur actors who muffed their lines, the whole show threatened to come apart. They were human sacrifices, like those randomly chosen youngsters that the Aztecs would treat as royalty for a few nights, and then cut out their hearts. Those who become famous are up there for our use. The most they can hope for is to be used well, but used they always are. They are our dreams come true, not theirs. We all need to know the name of at least one person who can sing the way we can't. It might as well be Pavarotti, who really does sing for the love of life. We all need to know the name of at least one person who can think the way we can't. It might as well be Einstein, who really was a great mind. We all need to know the name of at least one person who is evil the way we aren't, good the way we aren't, good-looking the way we aren't, brave the way we aren't, beautiful the way we aren't, difficult the way we aren't, doomed the way we aren't, frightened the way we aren't, famous the way we aren't. 20th century fame was an American invention that took over the world, and then the world overtook America. But the 24-hour Fame Spectacular goes on, just as before. Fame is the most glamorous byproduct of the new global information society, and we've come to understand it because the information comes with it. 90 years before, fame was more of a mystery. Now we know that we can't do without it as a guide, but are more lost than ever if we take it for gospel. If fame comes from achievement, it's worth having and worthy of admiration. But achievement without fame can be a good life, and fame without achievement is no life at all. Finally, what separates human beings is less important than what joins them, and the famous people we like most seem to tell us that by their way of staying human, as if there was a frail, fallible human being behind the glory, which there always is.
Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
This is PBS.